Hey, so pop quiz, Johnston County listeners. What's your county named after? Go ahead, think about it. Yeah, you probably know. Gabriel Johnston, royal governor, Scottish born, signed the county into existence in 1746. Good job, gold star. Easy question. Here's one you can't answer. Maybe not. What if the man whose name is on your county was just one link in a chain, that he ain't that important? Maybe, what if the guy who is the namesake of Johnston is really just a link in a chain? A full blown political dynasty that ran North Carolina for nearly a century, produced a U.S. Supreme Court justice, a governor, U.S. senator, and then somehow just dissolved from public memory like sugar in summer rain. Today, we're pulling that dynasty back into the light. And at the center of it is a Princeton educated lawyer, War of 1812 soldier, Speaker of the state legislature, Governor of North Carolina, United States Senator, a man who checked every single box on the political resume and still ended up with a Wikipedia entry that calls his tenure too brief for any outstanding accomplishments. Dude. His name is James Iredell Junior, and Johnston County, y'all listeners, he deserves better than that. To understand James Iredell Jr., you have to understand the family he was born into, which means starting, appropriately enough, with the man your county is named for. Gabriel Johnston, of course, governed North Carolina from 1734 to 1752, the longest tenure of any royal governor in the colony's history. He was a Scotsman, administrator, a pragmatist. He had a niece named Hannah Johnston. That niece would become the hinge on which his whole story turns. Hannah Johnston married a young Englishman named James Iredell, who had arrived in the Carolina colony at 17 years old to work as a customs official in the port town of Edenton. Young James, ambitious, sharp, not content to spend his life counting barrels, read law under Hannah's brother, a prominent Edenton attorney named Samuel Johnston. And then, in what historians diplomatically describe as a fortuitous match, he married the boss's sister. Now, Samuel Johnston. Hannah's brother and James Iredell Sr.'s brother-in-law and former mentor was not just a prominent attorney, he was one of the most powerful men in North Carolina. He served as the state's governor from 1787 to 1789, presiding over the very years North Carolina was deciding whether to ratify the new federal constitution, and then went on to serve as one of the state's first U.S. senators. And James Iredell Sr., the customs kid from Bristol who'd learned law from his future brother-in-law and married into the North Carolina royalty, well, in 1790, President George Washington himself appointed James Iredell Sr. to the United States Supreme Court, one of the original six justices. Dude, that's kind of cool. The first federal court in the history of the Republic, James Iredell of Edenton, North Carolina, was on it. So when you map it out, Gabriel Johnston names your county. His great-nephew Samuel becomes governor and senator. Samuel's sister Hannah marries a Supreme Court justice. And their son, James Iredell Jr., is born in 1788 into a family that has already produced a governor, a Supreme Court justice, and a senator before he even takes his first steps. Now, being born into that county is like being handed the baton at the finish line. Except the finish line is already on fire and everyone in the stands is watching to see what you'll do next. James Jr. arrived on November 2nd, 1788, 1 year after the Constitutional Convention, 1 year before Washington took office. His father was already famous, his uncle governing the state, and James Jr. was 10 years old when his father died. 10 years old, father dead. Son of a Supreme Court justice, no pressure. His uncle Samuel Johnston stepped in as guardian, moved the boy into his household at Hayes Plantation on the Chowan River, and made certain the Iredell name would carry forward. He sent James to Princeton, where the young man graduated in 1806, sharp, well-read, possessed of a family legacy that demanded he do something significant with his life. Well, he came back to North Carolina, studied law, passed the bar in 1809, married Frances Treadwell of Edenton, built a family of 7 children, and set about doing the only thing the bloodline ever really did, public service. When the War of 1812 came, James Jr. didn't watch from the porch. He raised a company of volunteers and commanded them in the defense of Norfolk, Virginia. By 1815, he held the rank of brigadier general in the North Carolina militia. That man was 26 years old. He won a seat in the North Carolina House of Commons, won it again, and kept winning it, serving from 1816 to 1828 with barely a break, holding the Speaker's chair or the Speaker Pro Tem's chair for most of that stretch. If you needed something done in the state legislature in 1820s, you went through James Iredell Jr. He was the floor. In December of 1827, the General Assembly elected James Iredell Jr. as the 23rd governor of North Carolina, and he arrived at the job with genuine ambition. He laid out an agenda: internal improvements, better roads and waterways, expanded public schools. He proposed what historians believe was the state's first serious railroad concept, a horse-drawn rail carriage connecting Campbellton to Fayetteville. In 1827, James Iredell Jr. was sketching the infrastructure future of North Carolina. He had the plans, he had the vision, he had the name, he had the experience, he had the mandate, and he had the governorship for less than a year. Because while James Iredell Jr. was settling into the governor's chair and drawing up his railroad proposals, Nathaniel Macon, a legendary senator, former two-term Speaker of the U.S. House of Representatives, and one of the most revered men in North Carolina politics, abruptly resigned his Senate seat. The legislature needed to fill it. They scanned the room for someone seasoned and respected, someone who knew the law, knew the state, knew how to show up and do the work. And they pulled our sitting governor. James Iredell Jr. packed up his railroad sketches, left the governor's mansion, and went to Washington to finish Nathaniel Macon's Senate term. He served from 1828 to 1831, did the job capably, and did not seek re-election. And then, in what should be classified as a minor historical injustice, virtually every account of his life reduced his governorship to the same 6 words: too brief for outstanding accomplishments. As though the man who had simply lost interest and wandered off rather than being conscripted out of the role by his own colleagues before he'd accomplished the things he came to do. It is, as legacies go, spectacularly unfair, like pulling a chef out of the kitchen after he's written the menu and then publishing a review of the restaurant that says the food was unremarkable. When James Jr. came home from Washington, he did something that, in his own quiet way, is more impressive than any of the offices he held. He went back to work. He opened a law practice in Raleigh, served on the commission to revise the state's laws, ran a law school. From 1840 to 1852, he served as the official reporter for the North Carolina Supreme Court, meaning that he personally recorded, edited, and published the authoritative accounts of every single significant case the state's highest court decided for 12 straight years. And then he wrote the book, 3 volumes, a digest of all reported cases in North Carolina from 1778 to 1845. He wrote the book, 67 Years of Case Law, organized and annotated and published by one man working in Raleigh. Now, for decades, if you practiced law in North Carolina, you had James Iredell Jr.'s digest on your shelf. His fingerprints are on every courtroom this state has ever had. He died on April 13th, 1853, was buried in the Johnston family cemetery at Hayes Plantation back on the Chowan River, back with the family whose name still marks the county where you're listening to this right now, or somehow you're connected. Every time you say Johnston County, every form you fill out, every letter you address, every time you tell someone where you're from, you are, without knowing it, quoting a 278-year-old political dynasty. Gabriel Johnston named the county, sure. His nephew Samuel governed it and represented it in the Senate, sure. Samuel's sister married a man who sat on the first Supreme Court of the United States, and their son ran the state legislature for a decade, served as governor, served in the Senate, and then wrote the legal books that shaped North Carolina law for a generation, before being filed away under too brief for outstanding accomplishments. James Iredell Junior was exactly the kind of person a republic is supposed to produce. And you know what, man? Isn't it our state motto? Isn't it esse quam videre, to be rather than to seem? He wasn't about shouting his own name, man. Just doing the work. Educated, principled, capable, willing to show up for every job asked of him and do it without drama, without scandal, without personal spectacle. Man, what a nice breath of fresh air that is. History, of course, has very little use for people like that. The flashy ones get the statues or demand that they get one anyway. The ones who write the law books and hold the floor of the legislature together, they get a quiet grave and a footnote that, unremarkable to be mentioned about. Yeah, and not today though. James Iredell Jr. was amazing. And y'all, that's JoCoYo. Be good.